She had everything money could buy. Private jets, bulletproof limousines, a security team that cost more than most people's homes. Isabella Vreneth, CEO of Quantum Industries, was untouchable. Until the night three masked figures grabbed her outside the Metropolitan Opera House, and all her wealth became worthless in 30 seconds of pure terror. He had nothing left to lose. Rowan Straven, ex-Navy SEAL turned struggling mechanic, was just trying to get home to his teenage daughter when he witnessed something that would change both their lives forever. What happened next in that dark alley wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of an impossible partnership that would challenge everything they thought they knew about power, trust, and second chances. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The champagne flutes clinked, like wind chimes in the marble-columned ballroom of the Grandshire Hotel. Isabella Vreneth stood at the center of it all, draped in midnight blue silk that cost more than most people's annual salary, her presence commanding attention from every corner of the room. At 34, she was the youngest CEO in Quantum Industries' 60-year history, a woman who had transformed a failing tech company into a global powerhouse worth $12 billion. Tonight's charity gala was her territory. 500 of the city's most influential figures had gathered to bid on art pieces and write checks with more zeros than most people saw in a lifetime. Isabella moved through the crowd like a shark through water, elegant, predatory, and absolutely in control. The Moreau Foundation will receive $2.7 million tonight, whispered her assistant, Vesha Mornell, as she approached with updates on the silent auction. The board will be thrilled. Isabella nodded, her emerald eyes scanning the room with practiced efficiency. She had built her empire on reading people, on knowing exactly who wanted what and how much they were willing to pay for it. Her company's quantum computing systems powered everything from financial markets to space exploration, and she had personally negotiated every major contract that put them there. But power, Isabella had learned, was a double-edged sword. The higher you climbed, the more people wanted to see you fall. She excused herself from a conversation with the mayor and stepped onto the Va Hotel's private terrace, needing a moment away from the carefully orchestrated chaos inside. The cool October air felt good against her skin, and for just a moment, she allowed herself to breathe without performing. That's when she noticed them, three figures in dark. Clothing lingered near the service entrance, their positions too strategic to be coincidental. Years of corporate warfare had taught Isabella to trust her instincts, and right now, every alarm bell in her head was screaming. She reached for her phone to call security, but before she could dial, a hand clamped over her mouth from behind. "Don't make a sound," a voice hissed in her ear. "Walk to the van nice and easy," Isabella's mind raced. Her security team was inside, believing she was safe among 500 witnesses. Her bulletproof car was parked in the VIP section, useless now. All her wealth, all her power, all her carefully constructed defenses had just evaporated in 3 seconds. The man holding her was strong, professionally trained. She could smell cigarettes and cheap cologne, could feel the calluses on his hands. This wasn't random. This was planned, precise, and very, very expensive. They forced her down a narrow alley behind the hotel, away from the main street where her security detail waited. The van sat there like a predator, its engine running, back doors open and waiting. Isabella's legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to move, forced herself to think. She had survived hostile takeover attempts, boardroom coups, and assassination attempts on her character. But this was different. This was her life, not just her career, hanging in the balance. "Faster," one of the men growled, shoving her forward. She stumbled in her heels, her mind calculating distances, escape routes, anything that might give her an advantage. But there were 3 of them, all armed, all clearly experienced. The lead man reached for the van's back doors, And Isabella knew with crystal clarity that once she got inside that vehicle, Isabella Vreneth would cease to exist. She would become a commodity, a negotiating chip, a problem to be solved by someone else's terms. For the first time in her adult life, all her money meant nothing. All her connections were useless. All her carefully built walls had crumbled, leaving her exposed and helpless in a dark alley with three men who saw her as nothing more than a payday. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent years acquiring everything she thought would make her untouchable, only to discover that touch was exactly what she needed most. As they reached the van, one of the men spoke into her radio. Package secured. Moving to secondary location. Package. That's what she had become. A thing to be moved, stored, and delivered. Isabella closed her eyes and did something she hadn't done since she was 12 years old and her father had lost the family business to bankruptcy. She prayed. Not to any particular deity, but to the universe itself, to chance, to whatever force might be listening in that moment. She prayed for a miracle. The van doors gaped open, like a mouth ready to swallow her whole. The lead man's hand was on her shoulder, pushing her toward her fate. In 10 seconds, she would be inside. In 10 minutes, she would be gone. 9 seconds, 8 seconds, 7 seconds. And then everything changed. The first call came at 11:47 p.m. Vesha Mornell had been standing by the coat check, wondering why Isabella hadn't returned from her phone call, when she noticed the earpiece worn by the head of security crackling with urgent whispers. The man's face went pale, then rigid with professional focus. "Code black," he murmured into his wrist microphone. "Initiate lockdown protocol." Within minutes, the Grandshire Hotel transformed from an elegant charity gala into a crime scene. Guests were politely but firmly asked to remain in the ballroom while security swept every floor, every room, every possible hiding place. The mayor's security detail coordinated with hotel management. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, but Isabella Vreneth had vanished. The security footage told a story that made everyone's blood run cold. Cameras showed Isabella stepping onto the terrace at 11:23 p.m. They showed her checking her phone, taking a breath of fresh air, and then nothing. The camera covering the service entrance had been disabled 30 minutes earlier. The alley behind the hotel had been a blind spot by design, meant to preserve the privacy of VIP guests. Detective Lorik Venrith arrived on scene within 20 minutes, his seasoned eyes taking in details that others missed. 23 years on the force had taught him that when billionaires disappeared, it was never simple. Money brought complications, enemies, and motives that ordinary people couldn't fathom. "Any demands yet?" he asked the lead security officer. Nothing. No calls, no messages, no contact at all. That worried Venrith more than a ransom demand would have. Professional kidnappings usually involved immediate contact, establishing terms and timelines. Silence meant either the perpetrators were still moving, or they had other plans entirely. By 2 a.m., the hotel was crawling with federal agents. The FBI had taken over the investigation, bringing resources that local police couldn't match. Agent Silara Grenthal spread crime scene photos across a makeshift command table, her expression grim. 3 men, professional operation, inside knowledge of security protocols. She briefed the assembled team. They knew exactly when and where to strike. This wasn't opportunistic. Someone paid good money for this. The guest list was a who's who of potential enemies. Corporate rivals who had lost billions in deals to Isabella's company. Foreign governments who had been outbid on military contracts. Investors who had been pushed out during hostile takeovers. The list of people with motives to hurt Isabella Vreneth could fill a phone book, but motives weren't leads. The van had been found abandoned in an industrial district 30 miles away, completely sanitized. No fingerprints, no DNA, no surveillance cameras in the area. It was as if Isabella had simply vanished into thin air. Vesha sat in the hotel lobby, her evening gown wrinkled and her makeup smeared from crying. She fielded calls from board members, investors, and media outlets, all demanding answers she didn't have. Quantum Industries' stock price had already begun to plummet in after-hours trading. Without Isabella's leadership, the company's future looked uncertain. She built everything herself, Vesha told Detective Venrith during her interview. No family, no close personal relationships, just the company. If something happens to her, thousands of people lose their jobs. Entire industries that depend on our technology could collapse. The pressure was immense. The mayor called every hour for updates. The governor's office had issued statements about pursuing all available resources. International business partners were threatening to pull contracts worth hundreds of millions if Isabella wasn't found safe, but the hours ticked by with no progress. Dawn brought no new leads, no breakthrough discoveries, no sudden insights that would crack the case wide open. Isabella Vreneth, one of the most recognizable faces in American business, had simply disappeared. Agent Grenfell studied the timeline obsessively. The kidnapping had taken place during a window of exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, between when Isabella stepped onto the terrace and when security noticed her absence. In that narrow slice of time, 3 professionals had executed a plan months in the making. They're not local, she told her partner. This level of precision, this kind of planning, it's military or intelligence grade. We're dealing with people who've done this before. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The search expanded beyond the city limits. Helicopters swept industrial areas and abandoned warehouses. Harbor Patrol checked every boat and shipping container. Roadblocks appeared on major highways, though everyone knew they were probably 12 hours too late. By noon the next day, the story had exploded across every major news network. Tech CEO vanishes at charity gala. Billionaire kidnapped in downtown. Quantum Industries in crisis as leader disappears. The coverage only made things worse. Every conspiracy theorist, amateur detective, and attention-seeking tipster in the country started calling with sightings and insider information. Police lines were flooded with false leads that consumed precious resources and manpower. Meanwhile, Isabella's absence created a power vacuum that her enemies were quick to exploit. Rival companies began poaching her top engineers with lucrative offers. Government contracts worth billions hung in limbo. The board of directors called emergency meetings to discuss succession plans that everyone hoped they'd never need to implement. But the most disturbing development came from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. Their profile of the kidnappers suggested this wasn't about money. Professional criminals would have made contact by now, establishing their demands and beginning negotiations. The continued silence meant the perpetrators either had other plans for Isabella, or they were already in the process of eliminating the evidence. The clock was ticking, and everyone knew it. In kidnapping cases, the first 48 hours were critical. After that, the chances of finding the victim alive dropped exponentially. As the second day dawned with still no contact from the kidnappers, Agent Grenfell stared at the crime scene photos and made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her career. Expand the search to include body recovery, she ordered. Start checking landfills, construction sites, anywhere they might have disposed of evidence, because in her experience, when billionaires disappeared without a trace, they usually stayed that way. 20-6 hours earlier, Rowan Straven had been having the kind of day that made him question every decision that had led him to this point. His 1995 Ford pickup had broken down 3 blocks from Westbridge Technical College, where he'd been attending night classes in computer programming. The irony wasn't lost on him. A former Navy SEAL whose job had been to break things was now trying to learn how to fix them, at least digitally. He sat in the truck for 10 minutes, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. before calling his 17-year-old daughter Kellis. "Dead again?" she asked without preamble. "Dead again," he confirmed. "I can get a ride home from study group. Don't worry about picking me up." Rowan smiled despite his frustration. Kellis had inherited her mother's practical nature and her father's stubborn refusal to be defeated by circumstances. She had been 12 when her mother died in a car accident, and in the 5 years since, she had become the most mature person Rowan knew. So he walked 43 minutes through the downtown district, past office buildings where people in expensive suits made more money in a day than he made in a month. He didn't resent them for it, exactly, but he couldn't help noticing the distance between their world and his. The Grandshire Hotel stood like a monument to that distance. Rowan had walked past it dozens of times during his job search, had even applied for a security position there once. They had been polite, but firm in their rejection. His military background was impressive, they said, but they preferred candidates with civilian security experience. He was cutting through the alley, behind the hotel, when he heard voices. Low, urgent, professional. His training kicked in before his conscious mind could process what was happening. In the Navy, you learn to recognize the difference between normal conversation and operational communication. This was operational. Rowan pressed himself against the brick wall and peered around the corner. 3 men in dark clothing surrounded a woman in an evening gown. Even in the dim alley lighting, he could see the fear in her posture, the way her shoulders trembled despite her attempt to appear calm. One of the men was speaking into a radio. "Package secured." Moving to secondary location, Rowan's blood turned to ice. He had heard that phrase before, in briefings about hostage situations and extraction operations. These weren't muggers or opportunistic criminals. These were professionals. His mind calculated options, with the speed that had kept him alive through 3 combat deployments. 3 armed men, 1 hostage, narrow alley with limited escape routes. He was unarmed except for a pocket knife that would be useless against whatever weapons they were carrying. The smart play was to call 911 and hope police arrived in time. The safe play was to be a good witness and provide descriptions later. The logical play was to recognize that he was outnumbered and outgunned. Rowan had never been particularly smart, safe or logical. The woman was being pushed toward a van, its engine running, back doors open. In about 30 seconds, she would disappear forever. He had seen enough intelligence reports to know how these things ended. Professional kidnappings rarely involved ransom negotiations. They involved body disposal. So he moved. 20 years of military training compressed into 10 seconds of controlled violence. The first man never saw him coming, a sleeper hold applied with surgical precision, dropping him silently to the ground. The second man turned just in time to catch Rowan's elbow in his solar plexus, doubling him over before a knee to the face put him down permanently. The third man was reaching for his weapon when Rowan tackled him into the side of the van, the impact echoing through the alley like a gunshot. They hit the ground hard, Rowan using his weight advantage to pin the man while simultaneously disarming him. "Run!" he shouted to the woman. "Now!" But she didn't run. She stood frozen, watching him grapple with the third kidnapper, her eyes wide with shock and something else recognition. Not of him, but of the situation. This was a woman who understood crisis management, who had seen enough corporate warfare to recognize a battlefield when she found herself on one. Third man broke free and swung wildly at Rowan's head. Military reflexes kicked in block, redirect, counter with devastating efficiency. The man dropped, unconscious before he hit the ground. Rowan stood breathing hard, adrenaline coursing through his system like electricity. Around him, 3 professional kidnappers lay motionless in various states of unconsciousness. The whole fight had lasted less than 2 minutes. He turned to the woman, expecting gratitude, or tears, or hysteria. Instead, she was studying him with the kind of analytical intensity usually reserved for business negotiations. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, still staring at him. You're military, former Navy. Are you SEAL? It wasn't a question. Rowan nodded. Double quotes. Thank you, she said simply. Then, after a pause, I'm Isabella Vreneth. Even Rowan, who rarely paid attention to business news, recognized the name. Quantum Industries. Billionaire CEO. One of the most powerful women in the country. And he had just saved her life in a dirty alley behind a fancy hotel. We should call the police, he said. Already done. She held up her phone. They're en route. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Within minutes, the alley would be crawling with police, FBI, and reporters. Rowan's quiet life was about to become very complicated. Mr. Straven, Isabella said, and he wondered how she had learned his name so quickly. I owe you a debt that I can never fully repay. You don't owe me anything. Anyone would have. No, she interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being heard. Not anyone. Not like that. Not with that skill, and certainly not with that courage. The police cars rounded the corner, their lights painting the alley in red and blue strobes. Isabella stepped closer to him, close enough that he could smell her perfume beneath the scent of fear and adrenaline. I'm going to make you an offer, she said quietly. Something that will change your life and your daughter's life forever. But first, we need to get through this. As Detective Venrith approached with his notebook out and his questions ready, Rowan realized that his quiet existence had just ended. Whether he wanted it or not, he had just stepped into Isabella Vreneth's world. And from the look in her eyes, she had no intention of letting him step back out. The police station buzzed with activity that felt more like a war room than a precinct. FBI agents huddled around laptops, analyzing security footage frame by frame. Detective Venrith had commandeered the largest interview room for what had become an impromptu command center. And at the center of it all sat Rowan Straven, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Walk me through it one more time, Agent Grenthal said, her pen poised over a legal pad already covered with notes. You were walking home from where? You were walking home from where? Westbridge Technical College. Night classes in computer programming, and you decided to cut through the alley because… Shorter route. I walk it twice a week. Rowan's answers were precise, military in their brevity. He had given the same account 4 times already, to 4 different investigators, and his story never varied by so much as a word. Agent Grenthal had interviewed hundreds of witnesses over her career, and she had never seen anyone more reluctant to be called a hero. 3 armed professionals, she continued. Military-grade equipment, coordinated operation, and you took them down barehanded. They weren't expecting resistance. Still, the level of skill required. I did what needed to be done. Agent Grenthal exchanged glances with Detective Venrith. They had Rowan's military records, or at least the parts that weren't classified. 8 years active duty, 3 combat deployments, multiple commendations for valor. The man sitting across from them was a certified weapon, but he wore it like an old coat he'd forgotten he was wearing. Isabella sat in an adjacent conference room, fielding calls from board members and crisis management teams. Through the glass partition, Rowan could see her pacing, gesturing, taking control of a situation that had threatened to destroy everything she'd built. She had traded her torn evening gown for a crisp business suit that someone from her office had delivered, transforming back into the corporate powerhouse the world expected her to be. But every few minutes, she would glance through the glass at him, and Rowan could see something in her eyes that had nothing to do with business. Mr. Straven, Detective Venrith said, setting down his coffee mug with deliberate care. We need to discuss your security going forward. My security? These men were professionals. High-end operation, sophisticated planning. Someone paid a lot of money to take Ms. Vreneth, and you just cost them their investment. They might not be happy about that. Rowan had considered this possibility during the long hours of questioning. Military thinking had taught him to anticipate consequences, to plan for retribution. But he had a daughter to think about, a life to protect. What are you suggesting? Protective custody. Safe house until we can determine who ordered the kidnapping and whether they pose an ongoing threat. For how long? Could be weeks. Could be months. Rowan thought about Callus, probably asleep at home right now, unaware that her father had just appended their carefully ordered existence. She had a scholarship interview next week for a summer engineering program. She had friends' routines, a life that didn't include hiding from professional criminals. "I'll take my chances," he said. "Mr. Straven." I said no. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Isabella entered without waiting for permission, her presence immediately changing the dynamics of the room. She looked at the assembled investigators with the kind of calm authority that came from running board meetings and merger negotiations. "Gentlemen, I need a moment alone with Mr. Straven." Agent Grenfell started to protest, but Isabella's expression suggested that arguing would be futile. The investigators filed out reluctantly, leaving Rowan alone with the woman whose life he had saved. Isabella took the seat across from him, studying his face with the same intensity she had shown in the alley. "They want to put you in protective custody," I declined. "Because of your daughter." It wasn't a question. Rowan wondered again how she seemed to know so much about his life. "Among other reasons." Isabella leaned forward, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "The men who tried to take me tonight, they're not going to just disappear. Someone paid them, someone with enough resources to hire the best. And now you've interfered with their plans. I understand the risks, do you?" Her eyes flashed. "Because I don't think you understand who you're dealing with. I don't think you comprehend the level of danger you've just invited into your life." Rowan met her gaze steadily. "I've been in danger before. Not like this. Not with your daughter's safety on the line." The mention of Callus hit its mark. Rowan's jaw tightened, and for the first time since the questioning began, his military composure cracked slightly. Isabella pressed her advantage. "I want to hire you." "As what?" "Head of personal security. Full-time position, competitive salary, comprehensive benefits package." She paused. "Including protection for your daughter." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. "What kind of salary are we talking about?" 200,000 annually, plus bonuses based on performance. The number hit him like a physical blow. 200,000 was more than he had made in his best year in the Navy, more than he could realistically expect to earn with his current skill set and limited civilian experience. It was college tuition for Callus, a reliable car, a house in a good neighborhood. It was everything he couldn't provide for his daughter on his own. "There would be conditions," Isabella continued. "You would need to relocate. Proper housing would be provided, naturally. Your daughter would attend private school, the best available. She would have opportunities that—" "No," Isabella blinked, clearly not accustomed to being interrupted. "I'm sorry?" "I said no. Mr. Straven, you don't understand what I'm offering. This isn't just a job. It's a complete transformation of your circumstances. Financial security, educational opportunities, a future. At what cost?" Isabella leaned back, her business instincts telling her she was losing control of the negotiation. "What cost?" "You're not offering me a job," Rowan said quietly. "You're offering to buy me, to turn me into another asset in your portfolio, another problem you can solve by writing a check. That's not, isn't it?" His voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Something bad happened to you tonight, and your first instinct is to acquire the solution. To own it, control it, make sure it can't walk away." Isabella's face flushed with anger or embarrassment. Rowan couldn't tell which. "I'm trying to protect you. You're trying to possess me. There's a difference." The room fell silent. Through the glass partition, they could see investigators pretending not to watch their conversation. Isabella stood slowly, smoothing her suit jacket with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. "Think," "About your daughter," she said finally. "I am thinking about her." "That's why the answer is no." Isabella reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, setting it on the table between them. "This offer won't stand forever. Mr. Straven, when you realize what you're walking away from, when the reality of your situation becomes clear, call me." She walked to the door, then paused. "And Mr. Straven? Be careful going home tonight. The men who tried to take me are still out there, and now they know who you are." After she left, Rowan sat alone in the interview room, staring at the business card. Isabella Vrentiff, Chief Executive Officer, Quantum Industries. Below her name was a personal cell phone number, written in elegant script. He picked up the card, studied it for a moment, then tore it in half. Isabella Vrentiff had built her empire on the principle that every problem had a solution, and every solution had a price. In her 12 years as CEO of Quantum Industries, she had never encountered a negotiation she couldn't win, a deal she couldn't close, or a person she couldn't convince to see things her way. Rowan Straven was proving to be an aggravating exception to that rule. She sat in her corner office 60 floors above the city, watching the morning news coverage of her heroic rescue with mounting frustration. Every channel was running the same story. Billionaire CEO saved by mysterious ex-Navy SEAL. Kidnapping plot foiled by chance encounter. Suspect still in custody, but not talking. What none of them mentioned was that her mysterious hero had turned down a life-changing offer without so much as considering it. "The board meeting is in 10 minutes, Vesha announced from the doorway. "They want to discuss increased security protocols." Isabella nodded absently, her attention focused on the file spread across her desk. She had called in favors from private investigators, corporate security firms, and old contacts in government agencies. What she had learned about Rowan Straven only deepened her frustration. Enlisted in the Navy at 18. Graduated top of his class from basic underwater demolition, SEAL training. Served with distinction in Afghanistan and Iraq. Married his high school sweetheart, had a daughter. Left the service after his wife's death to focus on single parenthood. Currently worked part-time as a maintenance supervisor at a shipping warehouse while attending night school for computer programming. On paper, he was exactly what she had assumed. A man struggling to make ends meet, raising a daughter on his own, facing a future limited by his lack of civilian credentials. The kind of person who should have jumped at the opportunity she offered. But the psychological profile painted a different picture. Multiple commendations for refusing to abandon wounded teammates under fire. A record of turning down promotions that would have taken him away from active duty. A man who consistently chose principle over advancement, loyalty over personal gain. "Stubborn," she muttered. "Ma'am?" Vesha asked. "Nothing." "Cancel the board meeting. Reschedule for this afternoon." Isabella had made her decision. If Rowan Straven wouldn't come to her, she would go to him. The address in his file led her to a neighborhood that existed in a different universe from her usual world. Modest houses with small yards, older cars parked on the street, children's bicycles abandoned on sidewalks. It was the kind of place where people actually knew their neighbors' names, where front porches served purposes beyond architectural aesthetics. Rowan's house was a small 2-story structure with peeling paint and a mailbox that leaned slightly to one side. Isabella parked her Mercedes across the street and immediately understood why 3 of her board members had called to express concern about her driving herself anywhere without a security detail. She didn't belong here. Her $1,000 heels clicked awkwardly on the cracked sidewalk. Her designer suit drew stares from a group of teenagers shooting basketball in a nearby driveway. This was Rowan's world, and she was clearly an invader. The front door opened before she could knock. Rowan stood in the doorway wearing jeans and a faded navy t-shirt, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Vrentiff." "Mr. Straven, may I come in?" He hesitated, then stepped aside. The interior of the house was clean but sparse, furnished with the practical efficiency of someone who valued function over form. Family photos lined the mantelpiece above a brick fireplace. Rowan in dress uniform, a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, a young girl growing older in yearly school portraits. "Your daughter's beautiful," Isabella said, studying the most recent photo. "She's at school." "Good. We need to talk privately." Rowan gestured to a worn leather couch. Isabella perched on the edge, acutely aware that this was the most modest home she had entered in 15 years. "I've reconsidered my offer," she began. "I haven't reconsidered my answer." "You should. The FBI released the identities of the men who tried to kidnap me. Konstantin Yezov, Dmitry Volkov, Alexei Petrov. All former Russian Spetsnaz, all wanted by Interpol for kidnapping and murder." Rowan's expression didn't change, but she saw his hands tighten slightly on the arm of his chair. "They were released on bail this morning," she continued. "Posted by a shell company that traces back to a corporation in Montenegro. Someone with serious resources wants them free. Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're in danger. Because your daughter is in danger. Because my problems have become your problems, whether you want them or not." Isabella reached into her purse and pulled out a tablet, showing him surveillance footage from the courthouse. 3 men in expensive suits walking out of jail, their faces hard and professional. "They know who you are, Rowan. They know where you live, where your daughter goes to school, where you work. And in their world, witnesses don't get to walk away." For the first time, she saw fear flicker across his features. Not for himself, but for his daughter. She pressed her advantage. "I'm not trying to buy you," she said softly. "I'm trying to save you." Rowan was quiet for a long moment, studying the surveillance footage. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Full protection for you and your daughter. Relocation to a secure facility until this is resolved. And yes, employment, because you'll need income and purpose while you're in hiding. For how long?" "However long it takes. And if I refuse?" Isabella met his eyes. "Then I suggest you teach your daughter how to watch for surveillance, how to vary her routes to school, how to recognize potential threats. Because those men aren't going to forget what you did to them." Rowan stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street where Isabella's Mercedes sat like a neon sign announcing her presence. A normal life, Isabella realized, watching him process the impossible choice she was forcing him to make. "You could have sent a representative," he said without turning around. "Could have made this offer through lawyers or security consultants. Why come yourself?" The question caught her off guard. Isabella had been asking herself the same thing during the drive over, and she wasn't entirely comfortable with the answer. "Because this isn't business," she admitted. "What you did for me, what you risked, it was personal. And my response needs to be personal too." Rowan turned to face her. "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do. Those men would have killed me. And you stopped them knowing it would put you and your daughter at risk. That's not a debt I can repay with money. Then how do you repay it?" Isabella stood, smoothing her skirt with hands that shook slightly. "By making sure you don't regret saving my life." As she reached the door, Rowan's voice stopped her. "Ms. Vreneth." She turned. "If I agree to this, if I take your offer, I want your word that my daughter's safety comes first. Before your company, before your security, before everything else." Isabella nodded. "You have it, and I want to meet your head of security, review all protection protocols, approve all arrangements before we make any moves." "Agreed. And if at any point I decide this isn't working, if I want out, you let us go. No contracts, no obligations, no consequences." Isabella hesitated. Once Rowan entered her world, extraction would be complicated and dangerous. But she could see from his expression that this was non-negotiable. "You have my word." Rowan walked to the mantelpiece and picked up the most recent photo of his daughter. studying it with the expression of a man memorizing something precious before putting it away. When do we start? The Meridian Tower complex stood like a fortress of glass and steel on the outskirts of the city, its 42 stories gleaming in the afternoon sun. Unlike the urban chaos of downtown, this was a planned community of luxury condominiums, corporate offices, and high-end retail spaces, all surrounded by landscaped grounds and discreet security checkpoints. Rowan sat in the passenger seat of an armored SUV, watching the approaching towers with the analytical eye of someone trained to assess defensive positions. The complex was impressive from a security standpoint. Limited access points, clear sight lines, multiple layers of protection between the outside world and the residential floors. "Top floor is yours," Isabella said from beside him, following his gaze. 3 bedrooms, full kitchen, private elevator access. Your daughter will have her own space, and there's a study area for homework. What about school? Ashford Academy has agreed to accept her as a transfer student. It's only 20 minutes from here, and they have an excellent computer science program. Rowan turned to study Isabella's profile. In the 3 days since he had agreed to her protection arrangement, she had orchestrated his entire life transition with the efficiency of a military operation. His house was being watched by private security. His belongings were being packed and moved by a discreet service. Even his night school transcripts were being transferred to a program closer to Meridian Tower. "You move fast," he observed. "When people's lives are at stake, delay equals danger." The SUV pulled up to a private entrance where 2 men in expensive suits waited beside a service elevator. Isabella's head of security, Marcus Tharvin, was a former Secret Service agent whose calm professionalism reminded Rowan of his old commanding officers. His partner, Calvin Drovic, had FBI credentials and the hyper-vigilant posture of someone who trusted no one completely. "Perimeter is secure," Tharvin reported as they exited the vehicle. "Surveillance teams are in position, and we've run background checks on all building staff who might have access to the residential floors." Isabella nodded briskly. "Any word from Agent Grenthal about our Russian friends?" "Still out on bail. Their lawyers filed motions to have the charges reduced to simple assault. Apparently, they're claiming the kidnapping was actually a case of mistaken identity." Rowan felt his jaw tighten. "Mistaken identity? Rich men with good lawyers," Drovic said with disgust. "They'll claim they thought Ms. Vreneth was someone else, that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. Without evidence of premeditation or conspiracy, the DA might have trouble making the serious charges stick." The elevator ride to the 40th floor was silent, each person lost in their own thoughts. When the doors opened, Rowan found himself in a foyer that was larger than his living room at home. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum rather than someone's home. "This is temporary," Isabella said, perhaps sensing his discomfort. "Until we can determine the scope of the threat against us." That double quotes us. Rowan noticed the pronoun choice but didn't comment. Instead, he walked to the windows and studied the view, automatically cataloging escape routes and potential sniper positions. "Force of habit," he said when he realized Isabella was watching him. "Good habits. That's why you're here." Tharvin cleared his throat. "If I may, sir, I'd like to review our security protocols with you. Your military background means you understand threat assessment better than most civilians." For the next hour, they discussed contingencies and procedures with the thoroughness of a military briefing. Rowan found himself impressed by the level of planning Isabella's team had implemented. Every detail had been considered, from emergency evacuation routes to communication protocols in case of separation. "What about my daughter?" Rowan asked. "What happens when she's at school, with friends, living her life?" "Discreet protection," Isabella replied. "She never see them, never know they're there, but trained professionals will be watching." "For how long?" "However long it takes." However long it takes. The answer was unsatisfying, but Rowan understood the reality of their situation. Professional criminals didn't operate on convenient timelines, and Isabella's wealth made her a permanent target for people who saw kidnapping as a lucrative business model. That evening, Callis arrived with 2 suitcases and the bewildered expression of a teenager whose life had just been upended without explanation. Rowan had told her only that his involvement in stopping the crime had created security concerns, and that they needed to stay somewhere safe until the situation was resolved. "This is temporary," he assured her as she explored the apartment's multiple bedrooms. "Dad, this place probably costs more per month than you make in a year. It's not about money. It's about safety." Callis paused in front of the living room windows, staring out at the glittering cityscape below. At 17, she had inherited her father's analytical nature and her mother's intuitive understanding of people. She could sense the weight of things left unsaid. "The woman whose life you saved," she said without turning around. "She's not just grateful, is she?" The question caught Rowan off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, normal people say thank you and move on with their lives. They don't relocate their rescuer to a luxury apartment and hire professional bodyguards." She turned to face him. "So either the threat is a lot worse than you're telling me, or there's something else going on." Before Rowan could answer, there was a soft knock at the door. He checked the security monitor and saw Isabella standing in the hallway, no longer wearing her business suit. Instead, she had on jeans and a simple sweater, looking younger and somehow more vulnerable than he had seen her before. "Ms. Vreneth," he said, opening the door. "Isabella, please. And I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I wanted to check on your settling in." Her eyes moved past him to where Callis stood in the living room. "And I wanted to meet your daughter properly." Callis approached with the polite wariness of a teenager meeting an adult whose importance she could sense but not quite understand. "You must be Isabella. Dad told me what happened. Some of what happened," Isabella replied with a slight smile. "Your father is modest about his heroics." They talked for nearly an hour, and Rowan found himself watching Isabella with growing surprise. Away from boardrooms and business negotiations, she was different. Still intelligent and commanding, but warmer, more natural. She asked Callis about her interests, her school plans, her goals, with the genuine curiosity of someone who actually cared about the answers. When Isabella finally left, Callis turned to her father with an expression he couldn't quite read. "She's not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Someone colder, more corporate. Someone who saw people as assets instead of individuals." Callis paused. "But she looks at you like you matter. Not like an employee or a business arrangement, but like a person she actually cares about." Rowan felt something twist in his chest, an emotion he wasn't ready to examine. "She's grateful for what happened. That's all." "Dad," Callis's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm 17, not 7. I know the difference between gratitude and something else." Later that night, as Callis settled into her new bedroom, Rowan stood at the living room window staring out at the city lights. His phone buzzed with a text message from Isabella. "Thank you for letting me meet her properly. She's remarkable, just like her father." He stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. "She gets that from her mother." The response came immediately. "No, she gets her strength from you." Rowan set the phone aside and tried to focus on the practical aspects of their situation. Security protocols to memorize, threat assessments to review, a new job to learn. But Isabella's words echoed in his mind, and he found himself thinking about the way she had looked at Callis, the genuine warmth in her voice when she spoke about their temporary living arrangement. This was supposed to be business. Protection and employment in exchange for loyalty and service. But somewhere in the space between professional obligation and personal gratitude, something else was growing, something that made their temporary arrangement feel increasingly permanent, and their professional relationship seem like a foundation for something much more complicated. 3 weeks into their new arrangement, Rowan had established a routine, that balanced his security duties with the surreal luxury of their temporary life. He woke at 05:00 for PT in the building's private gym, reviewed overnight security reports over coffee, and briefed Isabella's protection detail before she left for the office. Evenings were spent helping, callous with homework and trying to pretend that living in a penthouse apartment was normal. It was during one of these evening homework sessions that everything changed. Isabella had arrived home later than usual, her typically immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. Her jacket was wrinkled, her hair slightly disheveled, and there was a tightness around her eyes that spoke of difficult decisions and long meetings. Hostile takeover attempt, she explained when Rowan asked if everything was all right. Blackwater Consortium has been buying up shares through shell companies for months. They made their move today. Callis looked up from her calculus textbook. How hostile are we talking? Isabella managed a tired smile. The kind where they try to remove me as CEO and strip the company for parts. Can they do that? Callis asked. If they acquire enough voting shares, yes. They can do whatever they want. Rowan watched Isabella pour herself a glass of wine with hands that shook almost imperceptibly. He had seen enough combat stress to recognize someone operating on adrenaline and caffeine, pushing through exhaustion by sheer force of will. When's the last time you ate? He asked. Isabella paused, wine glass halfway to her lips. I had coffee this morning. That's not food. I'll order something later. No, Rowan said, standing up. You'll eat now. He moved to the kitchen and began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. Cooking had been one of the skills he'd learned out of necessity after his wife's death, and over the years it had become something approaching competence. You don't have to, Isabella began. Sit down, he said without looking up from the cutting board. You're running on empty, and making decisions when you're exhausted is how mistakes happen. Isabella sat at the kitchen island, watching him work with the same analytical intensity she brought to business negotiations. You cook. Callis would have starved otherwise. Hey, Callis protested from the living room. I can make toast. Burning bread doesn't count as cooking, Rowan called back. Isabella laughed, and the sound was so unexpected, so genuine, that Rowan found himself smiling as he worked. When was the last time he had heard her laugh like that? When was the last time he had wanted to? Tell me about the takeover, he said. Seasoning chicken breasts with practiced efficiency. Blackwater specializes in acquiring tech companies and selling off their intellectual property. They don't care about employees, innovation, or long-term growth. They want our quantum computing patents so they can license them to the highest bidder. How do you stop them? Isabella was quiet for a moment, watching him slice vegetables with military precision. Find a white knight investor with deeper pockets. Convince the board that fighting is worth the cost. Or find some other way to make the company too expensive to acquire. Other way? Poison pill strategies, golden parachutes, regulatory challenges. She sighed. All legal, all expensive, and all potentially destructive to the company's long-term health. Rowan set a plate in front of her, and Isabella stared at it with surprise. Grilled chicken with herbs, roasted vegetables, and wild rice that actually looked like something from a restaurant. Where did you learn to cook like this? YouTube and desperation. She took a bite and her eyes widened. This is incredible. It's chicken and vegetables. It's perfect. They ate in comfortable silence, the stress of the day gradually easing from Isabella's posture. Callis joined them, abandoning her homework to hear about corporate warfare from someone who actually fought those battles. What happens to the employees if Blackwater succeeds? Callis asked. Mass layoffs, Isabella replied. They'll keep maybe 20% of the current workforce, mostly engineers and sales staff. Everyone else becomes redundant. That's horrible. That's business. Rowan watched Isabella's expression as she spoke about her employees, saw the weight of responsibility she carried for thousands of families who depended on the company for their livelihoods. It was the same expression he had seen on the faces of military commanders who knew their decisions would determine who came home and who didn't. After dinner, Callis retreated to her room to finish homework, leaving Rowan and Isabella alone with their coffee and the awkward intimacy of shared vulnerability. "I didn't thank you," Isabella said quietly. "For dinner? For staying. For bringing Callis here. For disrupting your life to accommodate my problems." She paused. "For caring about more than just the paycheck." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you think this is about? Money, isn't it? If it was about money, I would have taken your first offer. 200,000 would have solved a lot of problems." Isabella studied his face. "Then what is it about? Then what is it about?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was ready to address directly. Rowan could have given her a dozen safe answers. Duty, protection, professional obligation. Instead, he found himself speaking the truth he hadn't fully acknowledged until that moment. "It's about not wanting to see you hurt again." Isabella's breath caught. "Rowan, in the alley that night when those men grabbed you, you weren't a CEO or a billionaire or a business mogul. You were just someone who needed help." He met her eyes. "That's who I'm protecting. Not the company, not the empire, just the person." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Isabella reached across the table and placed her hand over his, her touch warm and surprisingly gentle. "I haven't had someone care about just the person in a very long time," she whispered. "That's not my fault." She laughed softly. "No, it's not. But it makes this complicated. This?" Isabella gestured at the space between them. "Whatever this is becoming." Before Rowan could respond, his phone buzzed with an emergency alert from the security system. He checked the message and felt his blood turn cold. "We need to go, now." "What's wrong?" "Perimeter breach at your office building. 3 men matching the description of our Russian friends were spotted in the parking garage 15 minutes ago." Isabella paled. "They're going after the company. They're going after you. The office is where you spend most of your time, where you're most predictable." Rowan was already moving, checking his weapon and calling for backup. "Tharvin, I need immediate response teams at Quantum Industries." Potential hostile contact. As they prepared to leave, Isabella caught his arm. "Rowan, if something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you. But if it does, I need you to know that these past few weeks, having you and Callis here, it's been the most normal I've felt in years." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw past the executive armor to the woman underneath. Vulnerable, frightened, but trusting him with her life in a way that went beyond any employment contract. "Nothing's going to happen to you," he repeated. "I won't let it." But as they descended toward the parking garage and the waiting security team, Rowan couldn't shake the feeling that their peaceful interlude was ending, and that whatever came next would test both their professional arrangement and the growing personal connection neither of them was ready to name. The attack came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, swift and professional, and designed to send a message that no amount of security could guarantee safety. Rowan woke to the sound of his phone buzzing with urgent alerts from the building security system. Before he was fully conscious, military training had him reaching for the weapon he kept in the nightstand drawer, his mind automatically shifting into combat mode. "Callis," he called quietly, moving toward her bedroom. "Wake up. We need to move." His daughter was already sitting up in bed, alert and frightened. "What's happening?" "Security breach. Get dressed, grab your go bag. Meet me in the hallway in 60 seconds. They had practiced this scenario multiple times, but Rowan had hoped they would never need to implement it. As Callis quickly gathered her emergency supplies, he moved to Isabella's suite and found her already awake, standing by the window in a silk robe, her phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care what it costs," she was saying. I want every available security contractor in the city protecting our people. Rowan approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. Isabella, we need to go. She turned, and he saw something in her expression that made his stomach clench with dread. They didn't come here, she said quietly. They went after the company. What do you mean? Quantum Industries. Someone set off explosive devices in 3 different locations simultaneously. The server rooms, the research lab, and the executive conference room. Her voice was eerily calm, the kind of calm that preceded either complete breakdown or dangerous action. Preliminary estimates suggest the damage will cost somewhere between $50 and $100 million to repair. Rowan felt the pieces clicking together in his mind. This wasn't random destruction. This was strategic. Blackwater Consortium issued a statement 20 minutes ago. They're concerned about the company's ability to maintain security protocols and protect valuable intellectual property. They're calling for an emergency board meeting to discuss leadership changes. The takeover. They orchestrated this. Paid our Russian friends to create exactly the kind of crisis that would justify removing me as CEO. Isabella's hands clenched into fists. They're using my own security concerns against me. Marcus Tharvin appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Ma'am, we need to relocate immediately. Intelligence suggests this was phase 1 of a coordinated operation. Phase 1 of what? Rowan asked. The building security team found evidence of surveillance equipment installed in the parking garage. Someone's been monitoring our movements for weeks, learning our patterns. Tharvin's voice was tight with professional anger. They know when you come and go, what routes you take, how our security operates. Isabella moved to her bedroom to dress, her movements sharp and efficient. When she emerged 5 minutes later in dark jeans and a tactical jacket, she looked like someone preparing for war. Where are we going? Kellis asked as they gathered in the foyer. Safe house in the mountains, Tharvin replied. Completely off-grid, no electronic signatures, no predictable access patterns. As they waited for the armored vehicles to arrive, Isabella pulled Rowan aside. I need you to know that this isn't what I intended when I asked you to work for me. What do you mean? I meant to protect you and Kalis, not drag you deeper into my war. Her voice was quiet but intense. Blackwater isn't just trying to acquire my company. They're trying to destroy everything I've built, everyone who matters to me, including us. Especially you. They know that taking you away from me weakens my position, makes me more vulnerable to pressure. Rowan understood immediately. By accepting Isabella's protection, he had made himself a target. By growing closer to her, he had become a weapon that could be used against her. We can leave, he said. Take Kellis somewhere safe. Let you handle this business problem without worrying about us. Isabella's response was immediate and fierce. No, Isabella, no, she repeated. I won't let them drive you away. I won't let them take away the only good thing that's happened to me in years. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Before Rowan could respond, Tharvin signaled that their vehicles had arrived. The safe house was a fortified cabin nestled in dense woods 2 hours outside the city. Solar panels provided off-grid power, satellite dishes maintained encrypted communications, and motion sensors created an invisible perimeter around the property. It was the kind of place where people disappeared when they needed to become ghosts. For 3 days, they lived in a state of suspended animation. Isabella conducted business through encrypted video calls, coordinating legal challenges to Blackwater's takeover attempt while managing the crisis at her damaged facilities. Rowan maintained security protocols and tried to keep Kellis occupied with online classes and books, but the isolation and constant threat assessment was wearing on everyone. I'm tired of being afraid, Kellis announced on their 4th evening, looking up from her laptop where she had been working on college application essays. I'm tired of living like we're criminals hiding from the law. Isabella paused in her review of legal documents. I know this is hard. It's not hard, it's insane, Kellis continued. We're hiding in the woods because some business executives hired criminals to blow up your building. That's not normal. That's not something that should happen in civilized society. Rowan saw the anger in his daughter's eyes, the frustration of a young person whose future had been hijacked by adult conflicts she couldn't control. None of this is your fault, Isabella said quietly. And it's not yours either, Kellis replied. But somehow we're all paying the price for other people's greed. That night, as Kellis slept in the cabin's loft bedroom, Rowan and Isabella sat by the fireplace, the weight of their situation settling over them like smoke. She's right, Isabella said. This isn't fair to either of you. Life isn't fair. That's the first lesson the military teaches you. But this is my choice to fight, not yours. You shouldn't have to sacrifice your daughter's sense of security for my business problems. Rowan studied Isabella's profile in the firelight. Is that what you think this is? Your business problems? Isn't it? Isabella, they tried to kidnap you. They hired foreign criminals to physically take you against your will. This stopped being about business the moment they put their hands on you. She turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw something that made his chest tighten. Trust, gratitude, and something deeper that neither of them had been willing to name. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Do what? Let someone else fight for me. Let someone else take risks for my sake, her voice caught. Let someone else matter more than the company. Rowan reached for her hand, covering her fingers with his own. You don't fight alone anymore. Rowan, whatever comes next, whatever Blackwater does, whatever those Russian criminals plan, we handle it together. You, me, and Kellis. That's our team now. Isabella looked at their joined hands, then back at his face. That sounds like more than a professional arrangement. Sounds like more than a professional arrangement. It is more than a professional arrangement. The admission settled between them like a promise, changing the fundamental nature of everything they had built together. But before either could explore what that meant, Rowan's phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Motion sensors had detected vehicles approaching the safe house. Multiple contacts, moving with tactical precision through the forest. Their war had found them. Even here, Rowan's training kicked in before conscious thought could interfere. Lights out, he commanded, moving swiftly to extinguish the fireplace while Isabella killed the electrical power to the cabin. Within seconds, they were operating in complete darkness. The safe house transformed from a refuge into a tactical position. Kellis, he called softly toward the loft. Down here now. His daughter appeared at the top of the stairs, fully dressed and carrying her emergency pack. She had inherited more than her mother's intuition. She had absorbed her father's preparedness through years of observation. How many? Isabella asked, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Rowan checked his tactical display. 6 vehicles, approximately 20 personnel. They're surrounding the perimeter, cutting off all escape routes. Through the cabin's reinforced windows, he could see flashlight beams moving through the trees like predatory eyes. These weren't local law enforcement or federal agents conducting a legal operation. The movement patterns were too coordinated, too militaristic. Blackwater? Isabella asked. Has to be. The Russians alone wouldn't have this kind of manpower. Tharvan's voice crackled through their encrypted radio system. Command, this is Overwatch. I'm in position on the ridge with Calvin. We count 22 hostiles, full tactical gear, military-grade weapons. This isn't a capture operation. They're equipped for elimination. The implication hit Rowan like a physical blow. Blackwater had decided that Isabella was too dangerous to merely remove from her company. They wanted her permanently out of the picture, along with anyone who might complicate their narrative. Options? He asked Tharvan, limited. They have us surrounded, but the terrain favors defense if we can hold our position. Problem is, they're not interested in a siege. Thermal imaging shows they're preparing for assault. Isabella moved to the weapons cache they had hoped never to need. What's our realistic chance of fighting our way out? Rowan didn't sugarcoat the assessment. Against 22 professionals with superior numbers and equipment? Maybe 15%. And if we surrender? 0% survival probability. Callus looked between them, her young face pale but determined. So we fight? No, Rowan said immediately. You're not fighting anything, Dad. This isn't negotiable. Isabella was studying the tactical display with the same intensity she brought to corporate strategy sessions. There's another option, she said quietly. Rowan saw the direction of her thinking and immediately rejected it. No, you don't know what I'm going to suggest. You're going to suggest surrendering yourself to draw them away from us. And the answer is absolutely not. Isabella's smile was sad but determined. It's the only logical solution. They want me, not you or Callus. If I walk out there, they'll take me and leave you alone. They'll kill you, maybe, but they'll definitely kill all of us if we stay here. Callus stepped forward, her voice cutting through their argument. What if there was a fourth option? Both adults turned to her. What kind of fourth option? Rowan asked. What if they couldn't find us? Isabella frowned. We're surrounded, Callus. There's nowhere to go. Actually, there is. Callus moved to her laptop and pulled up what looked like building schematics. I've been studying the cabin's construction while we've been here. This place was built during the Cold War as a government safe house. It has features that aren't on any current blueprints. She highlighted a section of the cabin's foundation. Underground tunnel system, designed for emergency evacuation. The entrance is hidden behind the root cellar, and it connects to a cave system that exits about 2 miles from here. Rowan stared at his daughter with a mixture of pride and terror. How did you discover this? I hack things for fun, remember? I pulled the original construction documents from an archived government database. She looked between them. The tunnel's been sealed for decades, but I think we could break through. Isabella was already moving toward the root cellar. Show me. They descended into the cabin's lower level, where Callus directed them to what appeared to be a solid stone wall. But closer inspection revealed hairline cracks that suggested a hidden door. It opens from this side, Callus explained, pointing to a section where the mortar was slightly different in color. But once we're through, we need to reseal it somehow. I can handle that, Rowan said, examining the mechanism. But this tunnel hasn't been used in 40 years. We don't know if it's stable, if it's flooded, or if it even connects to anything useful. We know staying here means dying, Isabella replied. The decision was made for them by the sound of approaching footsteps on the cabin's front porch. Through the ceiling, they could hear voices coordinating a breach operation. Rowan worked frantically to open the tunnel entrance while Isabella gathered essential supplies. Within minutes, they had created an opening large enough for a person to crawl through. You first, he told Callus. Dad, what about the entrance? How do you seal it from inside? Rowan looked at the mechanism, then at Isabella and his daughter. The math was simple and brutal. Someone had to stay behind to reseal the tunnel and misdirect their pursuers. Someone had to buy time for the others to escape. I'll catch up, he said. No, Isabella said immediately. If anyone stays, it should be me. They want me, not you. And if anyone's qualified to evade pursuit and survive in hostile territory, it's me. Rowan's voice was calm but final. Get Callus to safety. That's an order. Callus grabbed his arm. Dad, don't do this. I'm not doing anything except giving you both a head start. He kissed his daughter's forehead. I'll find you. I promise. Isabella stepped close to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Rowan, take care of her, he interrupted. And when this is over, when Blackwater is destroyed and those Russian criminals are in prison, find me. Where? You'll know where. The sound of breaking glass from upstairs ended their conversation. Rowan pushed them toward the tunnel entrance, sealing the opening behind them as the first tactical team breached the main floor above. As he He prepared to face 22 professional killers with nothing but his training and the fierce determination to protect the two people who had become his entire world. Rowan Straven realized that some sacrifices weren't about dying for someone. Sometimes they were about living long enough to fight your way back to them. 10 months later, Rowan stood in the gleaming lobby of the newly rebuilt Quantum Industries headquarters, watching Isabella address a crowd of investors, employees, and media representatives. The woman at the podium bore little resemblance to the terrified victim he had rescued from a dark alley, or even the exhausted executive who had cooked dinner with him in a luxury apartment. Isabella commanded the room with quiet confidence, her voice steady as she announced the formation of the Straven Foundation for Corporate Security Reform. Too many companies today operate without adequate protection for their employees and stakeholders, she said, her eyes finding his in the crowd. Too many criminals believe that corporate warfare justifies violence against innocent people. The Straven Foundation will provide security consulting, threat assessment, and protection services to businesses that cannot afford their own comprehensive safety programs. The name choice still surprised him. When Isabella had first proposed honoring him that way, Rowan had argued for something more generic, less personal. But she had been adamant that the foundation carry his name, and eventually he understood why the night at the safe house had changed everything, not just for their relationship, but for how Isabella viewed the intersection of business and personal responsibility. Rowan's survival of that confrontation had been equal parts military training, tactical thinking, and pure stubborn refusal to die before seeing his daughter and Isabella again. The details were classified now, part of an ongoing federal investigation into Blackwater Consortium's criminal conspiracy. But the outcome was public record: 22 mercenaries arrested, Blackwater's leadership facing federal charges, and Isabella's company stronger than ever. The tunnel system that Kellis had discovered had indeed connected to a cave network, allowing Isabella and his daughter to emerge 2 miles away, where Tharvin and Calvin were waiting with backup. By the time FBI tactical teams had surrounded the safe house, Rowan had already neutralized 6 attackers and was using the cabin's defensive advantages to hold off the rest. He turned a potential massacre into a tactical nightmare for them. Agent Grenthal had explained during the debriefing. Professional criminals expect easy targets, not a one-man army with nothing to lose. But Rowan knew that truth was simpler than that. He had found something worth fighting for, something worth surviving for, and that had made all the difference. The Foundation's first initiative, Isabella continued from the podium, will be providing free security assessments to technology startups and small businesses in underserved communities. Because innovation shouldn't require choosing between growth and safety. Callis nudged him with her elbow. She's really doing this, isn't she? Apparently so. His daughter was a freshman at MIT now, studying computer science with a focus on cybersecurity. Her discovery of the tunnel system had been the beginning of a fascination with hidden networks and protective systems. She spent her weekends consulting for the Foundation, helping design digital security protocols that complemented their physical protection services. "Dad," she said quietly, "when are you going to ask her?" Rowan glanced at his daughter, then back at Isabella. "Ask her what?" "Don't play dumb. You've been carrying that ring around for 3 weeks." The ring was indeed in his jacket pocket, a simple platinum band with a small diamond that had cost him most of his savings from the past 6 months. He had been waiting for the right moment, the perfect opportunity, the ideal circumstances. "Maybe after the press conference," he said. "Maybe. You should stop overthinking it." Isabella concluded her presentation to enthusiastic applause, fielding questions about funding, implementation timelines, and partnership opportunities. But through it all, her eyes kept returning to Rowan, and he could see something in her expression that had nothing to do with business. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the media packed up their equipment, Isabella found Rowan on the building's rooftop garden. The space had been redesigned since the bombing, transformed into a memorial garden for the 3 security guards who had died protecting the building that night. Nervous? He asked. Terrified, she admitted. Starting a foundation is almost as scary as running from mercenaries through underground tunnels. Almost. She laughed, moving to stand beside him at the railing overlooking the city. Sometimes I can't believe this is real. 6 months ago, I was so focused on protecting what I had built that I nearly lost everything. Now I'm giving away millions to help other people protect what they're building. You're not giving it away. You're investing in something bigger. Isabella turned to study his profile. Is that what you think this is? An investment? I think this is you becoming the person you were always meant to be. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Isabella reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of 2 people who had learned to trust each other. Completely. Rowan, she said softly, I need to tell you something. What? I love you. Not because you saved my life, not because you protected my company, but because you saw something in me worth saving when I couldn't see it. Myself. Rowan felt the ring box pressing against his ribs through his jacket pocket. All his careful planning, all his waiting for the perfect moment, suddenly seemed ridiculous. Isabella, he said, turning to face her fully. Yes? Instead of retrieving the ring, instead of dropping to one knee, instead of delivering the speech he had practiced, Rowan simply cupped her face in his hands and spoke the truth. Marry me. Her smile was radiant, transformative, the kind of smile that made everything else fade into background noise. Yes, just like that. Just like that. As they kissed overlooking the city they had both learned to call home, Rowan reflected on the strange journey that had brought them together. A random act of violence had introduced them, mutual necessity had bound them, and shared adversity had forged them into something unbreakable. But it was love, quiet and steady and earned through 1,000 small choices, that would sustain them for whatever came next. The Straven Foundation would go on to protect hundreds of businesses and thousands of employees over the coming years. Isabella would transform from a corporate titan into a philanthropist whose work saved lives on a scale that dwarfed her previous achievements. And Rowan would continue doing what he had always done, protecting the people who mattered, one life at a time. Because sometimes the greatest legacy isn't what you build for yourself, but what you build for others to inherit. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.